Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the 8 biggest threats to corporate cybersecurity in 2024 and how to stop them. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone that they are on mute and their video is off, but if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature to our speaker, and he'll get your questions answered during our Q&A session at the end. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out as well as listed on our YouTube channel. To get started, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Today, we have Sam Bourgeois, the Director of Cybersecurity at DYOPATH. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Sam.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody who's here and watching the recording as well. Today, we're going to be talking about the biggest threats to corporate cybersecurity in 2024, and I guess more importantly, how to stop them. I'm relatively new to the team, but I'm really excited to have this conversation today. We kind of thought through, is this going to be a top 10? What's the video theme going to be? And we wanted to be very specific, but we also wanted to be kind of measured in our approach and just talk about the things that we felt passionate about. And so the timing is perfect. You may or may not be aware that the DBIR, the Verizon DBIR, which is some critical information, particularly in the United States, in terms of trending, cyber breach information, attack vectors, things like that. The 2024 DBIR is going to be coming out very soon, next month, actually. So if you haven't seen those webinars or you haven't heard about that, go to the website, go to the Verizon website, and you can sign up for those and get the inside scoop. What we're going to try to do here is give you just some feedback that we've seen from around numerous industries and markets, and kind of make some predictions ahead of that DBIR release. And those predictions kind of pertain to what we expect to see in 2024 moving forward in Q2, 3, and 4. So we've kind of broken it down into 5 external threats, 3 internal threats, and then how you can kind of proactively combat those things within your organization of any size. So without further ado, I'll introduce myself. I have a pretty interesting path to be where I am today, and that path has taken me through a lot of different industries, I guess, is the important part. So I've seen a lot of types of organizations, a lot of different sizes of organizations, and I've kind of seen it from internally as a customer of an MSP and an MSSP. I've been part of the MSP and the MSSP. I've been a fractional CISO, and then also in the operational role. So hopefully you'll hear some of that experience come out today with some good nuggets of truth or some ideas and perspectives. If you have any questions, please do drop them into our Q&A, and we'll try to save a little time in the end to get to those. So with that, let's jump right in. So the external threats, again, this is educated and informed by previous DBIRs, but also by a number of reports, the State of the Fish report, the IBM breach report. So my hope is that by me digesting and talking to my team and reading and kind of cataloging and collating all that information, I can kind of present you with a very simple short list, as it were, of the things that I'm concerned about for 2024. And top of that list is social engineering. The reason it's kind of the top of the list, and you'll see I've got AI enhanced there, is because the background image this is straight out of the 2023 DBIR. What you see is that rapidly rising slope there. And, in fact, 2023 saw an almost doubling of BECs, or business email compromises, in that year alone. Now, of course, that information is based on 2022. So my expectation is we'll see that number continue to rise, reported on 2023, but certainly in 2024. My fear in 2024 is that it's going to be enhanced by AI. And I think that enhancement and that new evolution of social engineering is going to be quite scary, to be honest. And protecting against that is going to be different from what it used to look like. And so I just want to kind of point out the obvious. We all know phishing, right? We know phishing. Some people are not quite as familiar with pretexting, so I don't want to dig into that too much, but essentially just kind of understand that attack vector of phishing, that's certainly included in social engineering, but now it's much bigger. So we're talking about pretexting. We're talking about kind of that thread hijacking, where there's a trusted third party, a trusted vendor, or some contact that someone in your organization knows, comfortable with, and trust, certainly. And those relationships and those threads, even in email, can be hijacked to pull up an old thread that was chatted about with the CFO from just a week or two ago, and then change some of the language, and the attacker might take over that thread, and try to attempt some kind of malicious activity, change banking information, et cetera. So that's kind of pretexting in a nutshell. But we're also seeing much worse. We're seeing things in that social engineering space that even goes beyond the email. Obviously, we're talking deep fakes, we're talking video. Now, probably most of us have kind of read that article or heard the headlines about the deep fake. There was something I believe that happened in Hong Kong just recently. But I can tell you from firsthand experience, this is something that I've actually been exposed to personally, and worked with a client on this one. So this is definitely a real thing, not just an anomaly, not just one headline. Thankfully, that was a thwarted attack in my case. But again, I'm fearing that AI is going to really change the game here. Number two on my list is supply chain attacks. Now, I think most of us are aware that supply chains are perhaps one of our greatest weaknesses, because we have so many limited defenses. Like recently we had Cysense. If you saw the headlines on that, 2023 we had Move It, 2022 Okta, Log4j. That was a bad a bad Christmas for me personally. But 2022 Log4j. SolarWinds in 2020. So we don't need examples. We understand this. But my fear is that there's not a lot we can do because we're so interconnected and we're so integrated with our trusted third parties, with our vendors, that it's going to be something that we can do our best to control technically. But ultimately, we're going to kind of have to shift the way that we do threat modeling and shift the way that we do risk management internal to our organizations, to do a better job of preventing those supply chain attacks and mitigating, because sometimes I don't know that there's a way that we can prevent them, because we're dependent on all these subcontractors. That may be of particular importance if you're in the defense industrial base. I've personally done a lot of work with CMMC seekers, OSCs, and that's the entirety of the focus of the CMMC program, is working with our defense contractors, so that we can protect the supply chain, and so that the DoD and our fighting forces are not going to be susceptible to some of these risks that could be prevented by basic cyber hygiene throughout the supply chain. So that's one that I feel like is going to be a big one for 2024. It goes without saying it's highly profitable, so I only see this going up. Hopefully not exponentially, but I only see this going up in the future. Number three on my list is ransomware. Now, ransomware, thankfully, I can't say it was on decline, but thankfully was flat in 2023. My feeling is that number is going to continue to rise, though. It's not going to remain flat. And that's because the rise in ransomware gangs that we've seen, the proliferation of these ransomware as a service kind of things. If you're not familiar with this model, essentially what this is imagine being able to take a successful ransomware tool or an exploit kit and then franchising that. Believe it or not, these exist. We have I've been to a couple of FBI briefings personally where we talked about, we kind of took a deep dive into some of these different gangs, and it's alarming. I mean, they're quite mature. They have a service offering as a franchise. They have their own help desk. If you're a malicious actor and you buy these ransomware toolkits, you actually have a channel partner, if you want to call it that. You can call in for tech support. You can get escalation if the tool doesn't work. So that's becoming so mature that my feeling is we're going to have a hard time keeping up with that. And again, it's very profitable. It's now present, like I demonstrated here, in 24% of breaches. Most people that I talk to are going to include this in their top three, and statistically, that is right in line with what I've seen. So that's my big fear. Those cyber gangs, as we call them. I just read an article in Security Week that that states that these are going to be definitely on the rise, and we're already seeing Again, I think I read a Reversing Labs article on this, that we've already seen the exploitation and the use of things like GitHub and popular open source repositories to share these things in new and innovative ways. So again, we're seeing an evolution to the processes of ransomware proliferation, and we're also seeing a rise in the profitability and a rise in that ransomware as a service. So that's a big concern for me. Vulnerabilities and the exploitation of those vulnerabilities. This is, I think, probably always going to be on my list, because the systems that we use are made by humans, and so we probably will not be able to keep up with the ability to dial in AI to ask specific questions, to create new exploits, to find new vulnerabilities. And our vendors are always going to be able to patch and to remediate. But I think the challenge that we have as a community is the speed at which we perform those updates, patch those systems, et cetera. The obvious problem is in most environments we might have server infrastructures or some specific line of business applications that can't always be updated as fast as the other tools in the system or the server OS, et cetera, can be updated. And so the problem and the challenge is getting the right information, prioritizing that information, making it actionable, and then remediating quickly. That's a big turnaround for a lot of organizations, and that's the challenge. And I put a note on there that's going to be AI enhanced. I can see that absolutely growing with the introduction of AI to find ways to capitalize on some of those vulnerabilities. Use of stolen credentials. This one might be surprising to some of you, but you can see on the graphic, again, this is from the 2023 DBIR, but you can see the use of stolen credentials is always going to appear on the list. And to kind of unpack that for just a second, the challenge with those stolen credentials is more or less a human problem in many cases. The behavior of a normal person, if they're not trained and educated on these kind of things, may be to simplify their life and use the same password on several systems. And unfortunately, that is quite common. And unfortunately, what we see is that your work email, your work account, your work password might have a reused password from some other system. And so when those other systems or other tools, whether it be Target or Home Depot or whatever it is, when those other credentials are leaked online or those systems are breached, we find those credentials in places like the dark web for sale. And we find that these malicious actors will store and use, and sometimes will kind of live off the land. They will get into your systems and just kind of stay and do reconnaissance and collect information and kind of stay silent in your systems when you may not even realize you've been breached. And so that all comes from that use of stolen credentials. Now, other credentials could be harvested. So kind of within this concern is what we see very common is to be like a credential harvesting campaign where someone will receive a malicious email, and the email, when you click the link, looks like a Microsoft, looks like a Google, looks like whatever page you're expecting to see. But in fact, you're actually handing over your credentials, you're handing over your username and password to that malicious site. So these stolen credentials could be from a number of sources. And I think that one certainly is going to have some increased risk and some increased statistics because of AI. Because I think we can create those kind of campaigns much faster, much more believable, and much easier than we ever could with just kind of human brains, human hands on keyboard. Long gone are the days of the African prince asking for money. Now we have very, very highly evolved targeted attacks that we're seeing. And again, I think that has a lot to do with the AI enhancement and the ability for anybody to get their hands on something like a ChatGPT, Gemini, et cetera, to craft those kind of messages, but also to create to create complex scenarios that, can trick humans. So that's my fear on those. Those are the top five for external. You might say, well, I knew about all those. Maybe there's a few things on the edge that were new to you, or maybe some nuance there that you picked up a little bit of extra information. But let's talk about what you may not know. And so, again, from our perspective, we do see a lot of risk internal to organizations from our partners, from our clients. And a lot of those risks kind of come from these three kind of big topics or themes, if you want to call them that. And the first one, in no particular order, is just a kind of a lack of understanding about business risks in general. And I put some food for thought, some questions to kind of get you thinking. I've heard people say, we're good with phishing. We know what ransomware is. We have backups, et cetera. But do you understand the pretexting threat that I mentioned earlier? Do you understand smishing? Do you understand the idea of deepfake? Do you understand the concepts around those kind of attacks? Because a lot of times, even folks who do security awareness training may not have a tool that has that particular component or something that specializes in that kind of targeted attack as part of their offering. So just be aware of that. Do you really understand what's at stake? And so this question for me kind of smacks of a great book I read some time ago. I think it was called How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity. And the premise of the book was cybersecurity is very, very heady, very kind of ethereal, and it's really difficult to attach real numbers or hard figures to it. You might have heard people say, well, there's a risk to our brand reputation or this and that, and then they can't attach values to those things. Well, I'm here to tell you, you can. So statistically speaking, you can attach real values to those attacks. You can attach real outcomes and real significant, outcomes of those kind of events. And so that's the foundation of what I would say is a good risk management program. And all security programs should be founded on risk management. That's kind of a fundamental bedrock of a good security program. So understanding what's really at stake, I think, is critical to protecting your environment and critical to your security program success. And so again, prioritizing those things, understanding what your threat landscape is. As a fractional CISO, as a vCISO, one of my favorite activities that I would do for my clients is creating a threat model. And so if this is not something you've done, imagine sitting down and looking at all the statistics, looking at the market, looking at your geographic location, looking at your business type, your clientele, et cetera. And imagine collecting the threat landscape and then prioritizing what those threats might look like for your unique organization or your unique community. That's a threat model. And I think that's a very powerful thing to do. Lack of staffing. I would like to tell you there's one example. There's actually many. But I mean, honestly, in the last 2 weeks, I think I've had a couple of conversations where I'm talking to someone in a leadership position about the size, the scope of their organization, the number of users and devices. And often I'll hear people say, yeah, we have a security person. And I say, one? Come again? Just one? And so understanding that could be an issue, and putting those two ideas together, the first one that I just described, understanding the risk, and then looking at that from your budgetary lens and from your strategic lens, and saying, is the risk that we're facing, and is the amount of information that we're trying to protect and the number of users, is that really in line with what I'm doing for staffing right now? And so there's one security person. First of all, I can't imagine what their workload is, but second of all, surely we're not expecting this person to work 24/7, right? So thinking about those worst case scenarios in advance, talking through some of those scenarios, and then understanding where your team comes in, and where you can maybe look for help, look for partners, look for someone else to help you to be more secure. I think that's a big thing that sometimes people don't contextualize in that risk management kind of lens. And so, the big truth is we're talking about internal threats here. Unfortunately, every one of your users and every one of your devices is in fact a potential risk, right? There's a risk that people will click the wrong thing, they will share the wrong thing maliciously or accidentally. And so unfortunately, you have to kind of treat all those things as potential threats, as potential risks. And so, we should have, I think we should have, as an organization, a good understanding of what our potential insider threats might look like as well. So staffing and as it pertains to internal threats, thinking about those insider threats. And the last one on the list I've heard just way too many times, that kind of it won't happen to us mentality. I've heard this from small property management companies. I've heard this from schools, and they say, well, we don't have any, we don't have any, really valuable data or potential data stored in this system. But I think what we're talking about, children, okay, that's some important data if you ask me. We're talking about, in the property management space. I say, well, why would somebody want to target us? And I say, well, do you have social security numbers on your applications? Do you have this? Do you have that? And so it's just a conversation about kind of opening up our minds a little bit and thinking about not just the size of your organization and where you think you might fit in the pecking order, as it were, but really understanding that this is a business. This is a kind of knocking on doors approach that you'll see from these malicious actors and ransomware groups, et cetera. They're not concerned about what it is that you do. Long gone are the days where we wouldn't see, targeted attacks on Children's Hospital, for example, like the Boston Children's Hospital. School districts are now under constant attack. So they're not discerning in terms of their targets. So there's really no basis for that whatsoever. They're going to attack and they're going to jiggle every lock on the street, and you're just the next door. Okay, so it won't happen to us. You got to throw that out. I've heard that a lot. Got to throw that out. And unfortunately, after attacks is when I usually hear that comment the most. And I said, people say we never would have thought that was going to happen to us because we're so small, because we just do this, because that's not our specialty area, collecting data. Unfortunately, it is. You are targeted. I can assure you. So how can we remedy? How can we make some positive impacts to some of the things that we talked about here this morning? And so we're kind of at the midway point here. The common mistakes that we see when people kind of hear me say all these things and they say, okay, that's great, Sam, we get it, we heard you. We're going to go ahead and solve this problem on our own. And sometimes we hear these mistakes happen and they come back later and they tell us, they give us good feedback, like that was a huge mistake. Companies will often just say, well, let's go get a tool. And so you'll hear this very commonly with security awareness training, with email protection, email filtering, things like that. They'll say, well, we understand security is a priority. We understand we need security awareness training. So we're going to go buy this thing. And there we go. We turned it on. We've got it licensed. We got that. And then a little bit later, they say, well, we need to do email filtering. Okay, let's go buy email filtering. And so what they have is, kind of a complex system of bolted on solutions that were meant to affect change on a specific thing or look to achieve a specific outcome. But it was very tactical in nature and it wasn't strategic. And so you're not going to buy tools that are going to work your way out of this problem or that are truly going to protect you the way you need protection. The tools that you choose and the companies you might partner with, they really need to have that strategic approach. You need to look for a partner, somebody who can tell you, have you thought about doing it this way with this combination of tools instead of this way with a larger combination of tools? Or could you simplify, or could you, as one of them here, not leveraging the past decisions, could you actually use a tool that you already have in your ecosystem? Is there something else that we could use to do this thing that already exists? And that's a big conversation. That's not one that, should be had lightly. And so what I what I take away from that is, as part of your security program, you should have a security program manager. Someone should kind of own that strategy, and that person should be collaborative with the other teams. So it shouldn't just be an IT thing. Clearly, an information breach of any kind is not just an IT thing. It's going to involve HR. It's going to involve all of your staff if their data was exposed. And so being collaborative in the way that we do that is really important, and not just thinking about it tactically, buying and choosing and selecting cybersecurity products or tools. And the way that we configure those is very important as well, of course. So the other mistake is kind of that middle one here between the two, and that is, we will sometimes buy tools, or we will sometimes bring in third parties or vendors or people who may call themselves partners, and we say, okay, do your thing, but then we forget that we may not actually connect the right people on a daily basis to truly achieve the outcomes we were looking for. A great example of this, vulnerability management. So how often have you heard that term, vulnerability management? Or if you're in finance, you need to do a vulnerability assessment. Understanding the connection between vulnerability management and your IT team is really, really important. Very often, I have personally seen that the two teams may not connect. The two teams may not be in sync. And an example of that might be, you have a scanner tool, or you have some kind of some kind of widget, some kind of thing that might scan your environment for vulnerabilities and send you a report. Well, the lady or the man who bought the tool set up the email, and somebody forgot about it. And I've seen this happen, and the vulnerability scans go somewhere, but people forget to look at them, and then that doesn't inform your IT internal. If you have an MSP, maybe you're doing a great job of your vulnerability scanning, but your MSP is not ready, or not fully aware of what that scan information says to make those changes. Or you have an MSP, you have an MSSP, but those two aren't in sync. They're not clicking in terms of what's the workflow. Once we see a vulnerability, how do we prioritize it? They say it's important, they say it's not important. They say you have to do this, and they say no, we need to wait for a patch window. So just ironing out those details, and again, that's just one component in vulnerability management, but ironing out those details and making sure that your cybersecurity product or your provider is talking to your IT to shore up those vulnerabilities quickly, and to make sure that you're remediating things that you see. So to get a little bit more specific, program, I talked about the need for a security program. Coming on this webinar and saying things you can do right away, and then number one, Sam saying you should have a security program, that might sound a little ridiculous, because you say, well, wait a minute, Sam, I can't do that right away. That's going to be a big process. You just told me this is a big thing. This is a big program. It needs conversation. It needs assessment. It needs road mapping. Yes, you're absolutely right. But what you can do right away is take the first step. Just decide to do it. If you haven't designated a security leader in your organization, someone that you can say, this person is going to take on this responsibility, do that. Designate that person. If you can't do that internally, look for a partner. Find somebody who can help you manage that. There's lots of options out there. Find someone who understands good program management and good cybersecurity, and understands your organization, your community, the people and your assets that you're trying to protect. If you can get those three things, I think you're going to be off to a great start. So just make that decision. If you haven't done that, make that decision today. And then when you kick this program off, think about it. Make good, sound decisions based on lots of conversation and thought. Make sure that you've got a foundation of GRC, your governance, risk, and compliance, support from leadership. Make sure it's people-centric. Whatever this program is, you get kicked off, it needs to be people-centric. It needs to be about the culture of security and the change to our culture, to our organization. Because IT doesn't do cybersecurity. We all do cybersecurity. Every single one of us, every user and every device is involved in our cybersecurity, because, as I mentioned, 90% plus of all these incidents, these breaches we'll see in the DBIR in 2024, I can almost assure you 90% are going to have some kind of human element involved in them. And so we need to protect our people, but we need to educate our people. We need to make it meaningful and relevant to them. Technical controls are certainly a part of that. And of course, eyes on continuous improvement. Always, always, always. This is never done. This program needs to be a thing that happens in parallel with your organization, with your business functions forever. And if you haven't done that yet, this is the time to start. So take that first step today. Number two, this one's a great one. I think I kind of touched on this a little bit, is consolidate your tool sets. So the problem that we often see, we've got all these tool sets that do all these different things, but nobody's really owning them. I've seen that a lot. There's no owner of this thing. And so it might just get turned on and then we just kind of forget about it, or it doesn't really get managed as well as it could. And the worst thing that can happen is not just, inefficiencies and slack in the system that I'm describing. Perhaps the worst thing that can happen is it gives you a false sense of security. You say, oh, I've got a fill in the blank. I've got an MDR, I've got an EDR, I've got a SIM. I'm good. I'm all settled. I'm safe. I'm secure. But if you're not getting back in there and checking those configurations regularly, it can build a false sense of security. And worse. What's worse? Well, it oftentimes occurs to me as I respond to major incidents as part of my daily job. It often appears to me as though there was just a checkbox that was forgotten, or a particular device that was forgotten in a closet because all it did was archive, and it wasn't part of our production environment, so we didn't have an EDR. Or no one ever used the VPN. We stopped doing that years ago, but we forgot to document that. And lo and behold, we had some old VPN credentials with no MFA still active. So I hear things like that, and those stories kind of remind me of all the breach notifications that I've read over the years. And ultimately, it's something that was not really meant to be in production use, or kind of forgotten in the back corner or the back room. And so keeping up with your tool sets, enumerating your tool sets, making sure that you have your vendors on a risk register, and consolidating those tools, that can be very, very helpful. It's a very easy thing to do for any organization of any size. So do your best to consolidate your tool sets. Number three for me is incident response planning. I've actually done a number of webinars and lots of talks on incident response planning specifically. So IR planning for me is absolutely critical, and I just don't hear it talked about enough. So my question to you today is, when was the last time you had a tabletop? Do you have cyber insurance? Do you know who you would call if it hit the proverbial fan, right? Like, who would you call? If you don't know the answers to some of those questions, you probably need to sit down and work on some incident response planning. If you don't have a formal plan today, or even better, a couple of playbooks according to statistical analysis, what's the most likely thing to occur in terms of risks and threats to our organization? If you don't have those playbooks, schedule some time, sit down with your team and say, how are we going to address this? We think we're going to find this at some point in the near future. We feel like I read an article that 45% of all organizations worldwide will experience a supply chain event or incident by 2025. So what are we doing about that? What does your incident response plan say about that? So if one of your vendors, one of your providers, Cysense was just 2 weeks ago, if you were affected by that, were you ready? If you were not ready, take some time and sit down and IR plan that. It doesn't have to be super complex. It can be very basic. Again, you can playbook this out. You don't have to have a big policy or a big giant manual. Just understand how those things are going to unfold, so you can be ready for it when it doesn't matter today. But when it does matter, there's not going to be any hiccups. And that's what tabletopping is. So if you've never done a tabletop, highly recommend that. I think it's a lot of fun, very, very beneficial to any organization. Imagine just going through a dry run, pretending that something horrible happens, working with your team, filling in the gaps. If there's a business email compromise and someone's email is attacked, Do you disable all the accounts while you check to see if the email went to anyone else? Do you have a different protocol if it's after 5 p.m. or on a weekend than during the day? If you did disable your emails, do you have call trees so you know how to communicate with people? That's a big one that people miss. I've heard that on many occasions. Well, we're going to disable all the email. And I say, well, that's great, but how do you tell people what you're doing? Because you don't have call trees. You don't know everybody's cell phone number. Or another funny one that I've heard is they kept the cell phones in their Microsoft environment, so no one could log in to see the cell phone to call the people. So think about those kind of details. That's the purpose of that table topping. Regular assessment and auditing. This kind of goes along with the table topping, but think about it more specifically. I've made this statement many times in my career. I've challenged folks and I've said, perhaps it's going a little too far, but I've said, have you tested your backups? Have you actually tried to do a restore? And people say, well, no, but we have assurances. And I said, well, then you don't have backups. Unless you've tested it, unless you've actually done it, you really don't have backups. Another thing that I've seen more and more common is this kind of backup as a service function that I see as very common in organizations. If anybody wants to go and research this, what I think it was a law firm in California involved with a major vendor, and essentially they were ransomwared, and their backups were supposed to be air gapped. They were supposed to be separate, but they weren't. Something went wrong, and their backups were also encrypted. So just understanding that because you've purchased a service, we call it a responsibility matrix. Because you've purchased a service or purchased a product, doesn't mean that it's necessarily doing everything you expect. I would encourage you to test that and audit that. Audit your systems, audit your people, check your systems just like you check your humans. So ask questions, do penetration tests, whatever you think is appropriate to your organization, but just probe and prod and make sure that you're auditing those things that really matter. Do a check for, what's the most common thing that we hear about now is someone want to change a bank account information in an email thread. Do a check on that. Just see what would happen. Bring in an outside party to try to do that phishing email and see how far they would get. And sometimes we find that we didn't have all the policies and procedures communicated as well as we thought we did. And that's a good thing to know. You're going to want to find that out before, those $25 million are transferred out of the bank accounts and you can't get them back, right? The last one on my list here is inventory management. And so the bottom line for inventory management to me as a security professional is you can't protect it if you didn't know it was there. You can't protect what you don't know you have. You can't protect what you don't know is criticality in terms of data, right? So are you inventorying your systems? Probably. Are you inventorying your third parties, your vendors? I don't hear that very often. Are you performing risk management and putting those things on risk registers regularly? I don't hear that very often. Most people will say, yeah, I've got my workstations, my servers, my firewalls, my switches, everything's inventoried. And I say, but where is it inventoried? And how specifically would you get to that single source of truth? And, too often we'll say, we have things inventoried, but when I dig a little deeper, I'll hear something like, oh, we have it in Azure. And I'll say, well, what if there's a device that's not joined to Azure? Oh, well, we don't have any of those except for those pile of computers in the back room. Oh, okay. Or they'll say, yes, of course, all of our servers. And I say, well, what about that archive server that is just sitting on an old Windows 7 or something in the back room? Again, that's a real example from a real scenario that I recall. An archive server that was supposed to be shut down, but was still network connected and booted, and it was ransomware. So thinking about that, inventory management, don't stop at the devices. Think about your credentials, your password vaults, your admin accounts, the number of users you have. That's all inventory, according to ISC squared. Those are human assets. So your personnel, those are human assets. Then of course, I think the future is going to be really focused on our data assets, categorization and application of sensitivity labeling and data loss prevention policies. Those things are more and more important every passing day because we don't normally keep track of those data assets. And so when we finally decide to do a project to categorize data or apply sensitivity labeling, we have such a massive amount of information that it's too much work to go through every little thing. So we decide, well, let's start it on this date and moving forward, and anything that we touch moving on, we'll label. And then that's what happens is we have this kind of forgotten information. And so my encouragement is to be very thorough in the way that you categorize your data and that you inventory your data throughout all of your information systems. All right, so big picture. I think big picture is important. I think we've kind of talked about this for a long time throughout this call, certainly. Making sure that you have a strategic approach and not a tactical approach to the way that you apply risk mitigation strategies or buy tools or buy things or buy services from vendors. Look for a partner. Look for someone that you can truly trust, someone who will give you straight answers on things and sometimes steer you in a direction that doesn't benefit them. Look for those kind of partners. Those are the people you can really trust. Find someone who can approach your organization holistically. The more that you can do, the more that you can put under that umbrella of your security program and have partners who can help you with that program, the better. Because isolating and creating departmental relationships with vendors is just going to kind of, separate your security focus, and it's gonna leave you with lots and lots of gaps. So again, understanding that security is not an IT thing, it's an HR thing, it's an operations thing, it's an everybody thing. Get a big picture perspective on that, identify your risks, create those threat models like we talked about, and get that big picture perspective, and then start working your way back through action plans to get to the tactics and the day-to-day stuff that you're going to want to do to protect yourself. We mentioned this before with IT, and I brought up the vulnerability management example, making sure that the right hand's talking to the left hand. So whoever's doing your security, make sure they have a hotline to your IT, that they're fully integrated. They understand what the roles, responsibilities, and scope of each are. The best way to test that, I mentioned the tabletops. If you go through a tabletop exercise, and almost always somebody's going to say this, they're going to say, oh, I thought so-and-so did that. And then they're going to say, well, no, I thought you did that. That's what you're looking for. Find those gaps, document those gaps, address those gaps, and make sure that the left hand is always talking to the right hand. Internal training and education. I know I think where we started the call today. This is very, very important. And it's very important that you do it well. It's not enough, in my opinion, it's not enough in this day and age to just have kind of an automated tool that you can just kind of turn on and click go and send out these fake phishing emails and send out these videos once a week. We need more. We need more. We need to truly understand how the uniqueness and the specific thing that you do and that your team does, how that needs to be included in our security program, because the training has to be specific to what you do. The operation, the SOPs have to be specific to what you do, to the ways that you transfer money, to the ways that you assign projects, to the ways that you store information. So that's really important that we have that internal training and education buttoned up. So make sure that training is focused not on bells and whistles and specific videos, but truly focused on creating a culture of security, a culture of cybersecurity, that each one of us understands we're part of the solution, right? All right. So just to kind of wrap it up and get to questions, we're here. DYOPATH is here to let you know that that we have a proven system. I can't say that we'll flip a switch and magically address all these problems, but I will tell you that we have a proven system. that has the right people, the right processes, and the right tools to mitigate, if not all, most of these risks, and more importantly, to partner with you to find ways to get those gaps addressed and to make it unique and specific and tailored to your environment. That's what our specialty is. That's what we do. And the I guess the culmination of that conversation and that philosophy, that approach, is what we've just done this month. And again, I'm new to the team, so this is kind of perfect timing for me. But we've rebranded. We've got a sub brand. It's not just DYOPATH. We now have our security program that we're calling DYOGuard. We have two basic packages, Protect and Protect Pro. And the best way to kind of categorize this is to tell you, this is, if you see the left-hand column, this is kind of the base, right? This is the kind of the must-haves in this day and age. A good, solid, best-in-breed MDR, managed detection response, that's protecting your hosts, protecting your environment inside your network, watching your people with email filtering, with the controls around the protection of inbound and outbound emails. We can talk about data loss prevention. We can help you with all those things around email security. Reputation monitoring is very important in this day and age, I think. We want to protect your brand. We want to protect you. If there's something happening on the clear web that we can find, we want to make sure we bring that to you in terms of vulnerabilities within your vendors and within your infrastructure. If there's a third-party provider, we can try to help you watch that, to monitor that, protect you. And of course, you get access to our SOC. So 24/7, something happens in your environment, you've got that one security person I was talking about. We can help with that. We can make sure that we're watching your back. We can make sure that we have the adequate incident response plans and playbooks on our end so that we can address things quickly for you to make sure that problems don't spread. If you want to take it to the next level, DYOGuard Protect Pro is a nice, tight little package. This is everything you saw in the other product, but we've got the fully managed SIEM and XDR. That means we're ingesting all of your systems, all of your tools, all of your APIs, anything in your environment. We want to bring it all in, and we want to enrich that. We want to take all those logs, we want to take all that information, and we want to enrich that with our threat intelligence to see if we can connect dots that maybe the one tool or the other tool couldn't connect. We want to find those ways that we can create actionable information to inform your security decisions and changes and future projects based on that information. That's our goal. We have vulnerability scanning included in that, penetration testing, and you get a dedicated analyst. So it's not like you have to pick up the phone and get somebody new. You're always going to have someone who's helping you to manage that program on your side. And so that's the goal of putting these packages together. And then if you want to go further, we have lots and lots of a la carte items, anything from compliance to fractional CISO, program management at that higher level. Whatever you need, we can help you. We'd love to have those conversations. So with that, I'll wrap it up and see if we have questions in the chat. Let me go ahead and stop share. All right, let's see what we got. If you have any questions, you can drop them in. I don't see anything yet, but again, thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope this was informative. I hope that you're paying attention to the DBIR when it gets released. If you're a numbers and trend guy like me, be sure to check that out as soon as it's released. Maybe we'll do a follow-up and we'll see how close our predictions were to the DBIR information and the findings from 2023. But I'll hang out for a little bit more, but that should do it for us.
Yeah, thank you to everyone for joining our webinar today. A recording will be sent out and also listed on our YouTube channel. If you'd like to learn more about DYOGuard or DYOPATH in general, you can visit our website at dyopath.com. Thank you to everyone and have a good day.
Take care.